Jack Monroe parked his truck outside the Miles City Public Library a little before 8 a.m. The engine sputtered into silence, the windshield fogging slightly from the residual breath of winter. Outside, the small-town streets were just beginning to stir. Across the road, someone shoveled snow with the rhythm of someone who had done it for decades. He sat for a moment, watching his own breath cloud the glass, then grabbed his backpack and stepped out into the cold. The library looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Flat roof, red brick, metal-framed windows that rattled in the wind. A single sign by the entrance read, Miles City Public Library, Open Hearts. Open books. He liked that. Inside, the warmth hit him like a slow-moving wave. It smelled of dust, leather bindings, and old hope. The kind of place where silence wasn't enforced, it was just understood. The world outside slowed to a hush the moment the door clicked shut behind him. A small bell above the front desk chimed. From behind a stack of return carts, a voice floated out, soft, deliberate. You must be Jack. He turned to find a woman approaching, maybe in her early 70s, hair tied in a simple bun, glasses perched low on her nose. She wore a gray cardigan buttoned to the throat and moved with the grace of someone who never rushed, because she never had to. I'm Beatrice Maynard, she said, extending a thin hand. Call me B, if you like. I was told you called yesterday. Jack nodded and shook her hand gently. Yes, ma'am. I'm doing a kind of personal project. One job a day. Volunteer if needed. Her eyes softened. I know. The man from Debbie's Grill called ahead. Jack raised an eyebrow. She smiled. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, it means something. She handed him a small clipboard. You'll be helping in the archive room today, reshelving, organizing the accessibility section, and realigning the reading lamps. Nothing glamorous. Jack gave a faint smirk. Not looking for glamour. Good, B said, because this is a place that asks only two things. Stay quiet and stay present. Jack followed her through the main hall. The library was modest. For main rows of books, a children's corner, and a row of armchairs along the far wall by frosted windows. The light streamed in softly through the glass, touching everything with a golden calm. There were only a few early visitors. A man in a worn trench coat thumbing through a local newspaper, a pair of elderly women murmuring over knitting books, a boy in the corner peeking at graphic novels when he thought no one was looking. He led Jack to a side room behind a frosted glass door labeled Archive and Access. She showed him a collection of books stacked waist-high that needed reshelving by author and subject, then pointed to the lamps along the reading tables, some of which flickered or wouldn't stay upright. I'll check in at noon, she said. The lights can be finicky. And please don't move the Braille section. It's arranged by someone far wiser than either of us. Jack nodded and removed his jacket. Got it. He paused before leaving, then turned back. Mr. Monroe? Yeah. You don't have to explain yourself here. Just work. Let the quiet do what it does. Jack met her gaze. There was something in her eyes, like she'd seen enough grief to know when to speak softly, and enough strength to know when not to speak at all. Thank you, he said quietly. Left alone, Jack took a deep breath and looked around. The walls hummed faintly with the low rhythm of heating vents. The overhead bulbs buzzed in intervals. He picked up the first stack of books, titles on local history and natural landscapes, and began placing them back where they belonged. He didn't realize it at first, but his breathing had slowed. The rigid tension he usually carried in his shoulders, present even when he slept, had started to soften. There were no orders.
No barking voices.
No questions about who he'd been. Just the sound of pages turning in the next room, and the slow return of quiet purpose. Jack found a rhythm. It wasn't the thumping tempo of a drill sergeant's cadence or the pulsing beat of rotor blades overhead. It was gentler, more human. The quiet shuffle of paper, the soft thud of books reshelved, the near-musical wheeze of an ancient rolling ladder on worn carpet. He spent the first 2 hours organizing a cart of returned books, guided by a faded Dewey Decimal chart taped to the desk like a relic from a forgotten time. Beatrice floated in and out like a librarian ghost, offering occasional direction with a nod or the barest whisper. Third shelf. Left. Jack didn't mind. He was starting to like the silence. Mid-morning brought in a wave of older patrons. A stooped gentleman in a faded Vietnam veteran cap asked for help locating a biography of Doris Kearns Goodwin. A pair of elderly sisters debated the merits of Jane Austen versus Agatha Christie near the mystery section, dragging Jack into the discussion for comic relief. "I just carry the books," he said, raising his hands. "You look like someone who's read more than you let on." One of them winked, but the moment that lingered came quietly, at the edge of the large print section. Jack had just finished adjusting a crooked lamp when he noticed a frail woman standing near the corner, fidgeting with her cane. Her hands trembled as she reached for a worn copy of Gone with the Wind, but it slipped from the shelf and tumbled to the floor. Jack moved without thinking. He picked up the book gently and offered it to her with both hands. "May I help you to a chair?" he asked softly. She smiled at him, more with her eyes than her lips, and nodded. As he walked her to the nearby armchair, she spoke for the first time, barely audible. "My husband and I used to read it together every spring, before he left for Korea." Jack hesitated, something catching in his throat. "Did he come back?" Her smile held. "Only in dreams." He helped her sit, adjusted the lamp beside her, and placed the book in her lap like a sacred text. For the next half hour, Jack shelved books in near silence, but his mind wandered. That sentence stuck like a splinter. Only in dreams. After shelving a few dusty biographies, Jack returned to the main desk to drop off the clipboard. Beatrice was there, sorting through a stack of donations. Her hands moved methodically, but her eyes flicked up as he approached. "You did well with Mrs. Garrison," she said, her voice warm. "She mentioned her husband," Jack replied.
Correo.
Beatrice nodded. "She visits every week. Same book, same seat." She said he came back only in dreams. Beatrice didn't respond right away. Instead, she opened a drawer beneath the desk. Inside was a small, tightly bound box worn at the corners. She lifted the lid gently. Letters. Dozens of them. All handwritten. All yellowed with time. Jack blinked. "My husband, James, flew C-130s out of Da Nang," Beatrice said, her voice low and steady. "He died in 1971. I kept every letter he ever sent me. 37 in all." She pulled one out, unfolded it carefully, as though it might crumble from memory alone. "Sometimes, I still read them aloud, just to fill the silence." Jack didn't speak. Beatrice looked up, eyes shimmering. "You don't need to say anything, Jack. Just know that you're not the only one learning how to live after a goodbye." He swallowed hard and nodded. She returned the letter to the box and closed the drawer with quiet reverence. Then, as if the moment hadn't happened, she handed him a new list of tasks. "Ready to tackle the Braille section?" Jack smiled faintly. "Lead the way." Jack had just finished aligning the last row of magnifying glass stands in the accessibility section when he noticed her. She was small, couldn't have been older than 10, and sat like a shadow in the far corner of the children's reading room. Not in the beanbag chairs or by the colorful shelves meant for kids, but nestled behind an unused magazine rack, legs crossed, book balanced neatly in her lap. The book looked too advanced for her age, The Secret Garden, and her eyes moved across the page with slow determination, like each word cost something. Beatrice noticed his glance. She didn't speak, just walked over and placed a hand gently on his elbow. "Lila," she whispered. "She's here most afternoons. Her mother passed last year."
Car accident.
"Her father, he hasn't been the same. Neither has she." Jack kept his voice low. "Does she talk?" Beatrice shook her head. "Not since the funeral. School says she's not disruptive, just distant. This is one of the only places she'll go voluntarily." Jack nodded, watching the girl for a long moment. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her backpack, propped beside her, had a small fabric bunny keychain hanging from the zipper. He recognized the kind they gave away at shelters. Gifts meant to be comforting, often given when something traumatic had been taken away. He didn't approach her. He just continued his work nearby, organizing some oversized illustrated books and wiping down plastic reading mats. Occasionally, he glanced her way. She didn't move much, just flipped pages slowly, methodically. At one point, she looked up and caught him watching. Her eyes widened, caught like an animal unsure if it needed to flee. Jack looked away quickly and busied himself with a cart of coloring books. Later that afternoon, he was restocking a shelf of donated puzzles when he heard footsteps. Not hurried ones, soft, small. He turned just enough to see Lila place something on the cart he was working on. It was a folded sheet of paper. By the time he looked up, she was already back in her corner. Jack opened the paper gently. It was a page torn from a notebook, creased in half. The handwriting was small and careful. In blue ink, "I saw you watching. Not mad. You're quiet too." He stood there for a moment, the paper light in his hands, like it might vanish. He didn't approach her. He didn't thank her. Instead, he walked to the desk, borrowed a pencil from the donation jar, and wrote a reply on the back. "I used to talk a lot. Then the world got loud. I'm trying to find my voice again." He waited until she was back in her reading position, legs crossed, head down, then quietly set the note at the edge of her backpack and walked away. Later, when he returned to reshelve more books, the note was gone. That evening, just before closing time, Beatrice handed Jack a small wrapped sandwich and a mug of tea. "You made an impression," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "With who?" Beatrice gestured toward the quiet corner. Lila's spot was empty, but on the small round table where she'd sat, there was another piece of paper, folded and weighted by a book. Jack picked it up. It wasn't a note this time. It was a drawing, done in colored pencil. Two figures, seated back to back beneath a tree. One wore a green jacket and had short cropped hair. The other had long brown hair and a book in her hands. Above them, a single sentence written in large, blocky letters. "I hear you." Jack swallowed hard. Beatrice came beside him. "You don't always have to speak to be heard, Jack." He folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into the front pocket of his backpack. "Yeah," he said, voice quiet. "I'm starting to believe that." The library had closed an hour ago, but the air inside still hummed with a quiet that felt sacred. Jack sat at a small round table in the staff lounge, nursing a cup of chamomile tea in a chipped floral mug. The lights were dim, and the only sounds were the occasional creaks of old wood and the faint ticking of a wall clock shaped like an owl. Across from him, Beatrice poured herself a second cup, her movements deliberate. She had taken off her cardigan and now wore just a simple blouse with sleeves rolled up. The years showed in her hands, in the soft sag around her eyes, but there was a kind of unshakable steadiness in the way she looked at people. Jack found it both disarming and grounding. "I saw the drawing," she said, breaking the silence. "She's never done that before." Jack nodded, holding the cup between his palms. "I didn't do much." "You were seen," Beatrice replied. "That's not nothing." Jack sipped the tea, its warmth lingering long after the swallow. He stared into the mug. "When I first came back, I thought I'd walk into a world waiting for me, people waving flags, welcoming me home. But it was quiet, too quiet, like everything had moved on without me." Beatrice didn't interrupt. She just waited. "I think that's what hurts the most," Jack continued. "Not the war, not the nightmares, just the feeling that I came home invisible." Beatrice let out a slow breath. Then, without a word, she rose from her chair and crossed to a wooden cabinet near the wall. She opened it gently and pulled out a slim, cloth-covered box, the same one Jack had seen earlier. Returning to the table, she laid it down between them. "After James died," she began, "they sent home a bag of his things. Uniform, dog tags, letters. Most of them were ones I had written to him. But there was one I hadn't seen before." She opened the box and withdrew a yellowed envelope, carefully unsealing it. The handwriting was precise, almost military in its order. "I didn't read it for months," she said. "Maybe I was afraid it would be the end." That after his words stopped, so would everything else. Jack leaned in slightly. Beatrice unfolded the letter, but she didn't read from it. She looked up at Jack instead. It said, "B, if you're reading this, I didn't make it, but don't mourn me long. You are the story I'm proudest of. Keep telling it." Jack felt his breath catch. "He didn't want me stuck in grief," she said. "He wanted me to continue, to carry the light of what we had forward. I didn't understand that for years, but now I do." She slid the letter across the table toward Jack. He didn't touch it, just stared at the faded ink, the edges worn by time and hands and tears. "I think," she said softly, "you have stories inside you too. Ones that haven't been told because they're tangled up in pain. But if you keep them buried, Jack, they'll rot instead of heal." Jack finally looked up, eyes clouded but focused. "I don't know how to start," he admitted. Beatrice smiled gently. "Start where it hurts. The heart knows how to stitch itself if you give it thread." They sat in silence for a long moment, two people holding grief like a photograph between them. Eventually, Jack reached into his backpack and pulled out his notebook, the one still nearly empty. He didn't write in it yet, but he opened to the first clean page. That was something. "Let me know if you'd like to move forward with part 5. The first letter, where Jack writes for the first time about Carlos, his fallen friend, and takes a meaningful step toward healing. The library was dark except for one reading lamp. Jack sat at a back table in the reference room, alone with his notebook, Beatrice's words still echoing in his head. "Start where it hurts." He stared at the blank page for a long time. His hands hovered over the pencil. They had gripped rifles, stretchers, flagpoles. But now they trembled over something as simple as writing a name. Carlos. He wrote it in the corner of the page. Then he stopped. The silence pressed in around him, thick and expectant. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and through the frosted glass, snow fell outside like a slow confession. He glanced at the books nearby, dusty reference tomes, atlases, binders filled with old obituaries. This was a place for things people wanted to remember. But it was also a place where forgotten stories waited to be found again. He put the pencil down and rubbed his face with both hands. Carlos hadn't had a funeral, not one Jack could attend, anyway. Just a flag, folded and mailed, with a form letter about heroism and sacrifice. But none of that said anything about the jokes Carlos used to tell, the drawings he kept in his pocket, the fear in his eyes the day before the blast. Jack picked up the pencil again and wrote, "Carlos, I'm sorry it's taken me this long. I couldn't find the words. I still can't, really. You were faster than me. Funnier. Better at poker. You didn't deserve to go that way. And I didn't deserve to come home instead." He paused, then underlined the next word. "But I did." He swallowed the lump in his throat and continued. "And I don't know what to do with that except try to be someone you'd be proud of. Today I helped a girl who doesn't talk. She drew me a picture. I think she heard me. Not the words, just something else. Maybe part of you. Maybe part of me that hasn't given up yet." He sat back. The pencil rested on the paper like it had run a marathon. For the first time in months, Jack didn't feel like a ghost sitting in the back of someone else's life. He closed the notebook gently, like tucking a child into bed. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. Jack sat behind the wheel of his truck, parked once again in the quiet lot outside the library. The sun had dipped below the rooftops of Miles City, casting long lavender shadows across the snow-covered sidewalks. The dashboard clock blinked 6:17 p.m. It was cold enough that his breath fogged the glass, but he hadn't started the engine yet. He liked the stillness. He reached across the seat, pulled out his notebook, and set it on the dash. Then he dug into his coat pocket and unfolded the small drawing. Lila's picture. 2 figures, backs against a tree. One unmistakably him, broad shoulders, short hair, the green jacket. the other smaller, with brown hair and a book in hand. Above them, in colored pencil, she'd written, "I hear you." Jack smiled softly. His thumb ran across the paper's edge. He reached for his phone, propped it on the dash against the notebook, and tapped record. For a moment he just breathed. Then, with a voice quieter than yesterday, but somehow stronger, he began. Day 2. He glanced at the drawing again. "I spent today in a place I usually avoided. I always thought libraries were for people who had things figured out, people who weren't running from silence." He exhaled, fogging the glass. "But I think I was wrong. Silence doesn't mean forgetting, or loneliness. Sometimes it just means presence, holding space for something that needs time." He looked back at the camera, eyes steady. "I met a girl today. Her name's Lila. She doesn't speak. Not since she lost her mom. But she listens. Better than most people I've met." He paused, then lifted the drawing gently into the frame. "She gave me this. No words. Just this. And it says more than a paragraph ever could." He set the drawing back down carefully. "There was a time, not long ago, when I would have looked at this and felt nothing. Or worse, felt like I didn't deserve it." A flicker of sadness crossed his face. "But today, I felt it. I felt seen. And not as a soldier. Not as a broken man. Just as someone who was still here." The phone's camera light glowed against his face like a candle. He tilted his head, thinking. "I used to think that healing would come with noise. With some big moment, parades, closure, answers. But now I think maybe it starts quieter than that." He tapped the notebook once. With a pencil. A note. A look from someone who doesn't say a word, but still says everything. He ended the video not with a sign-off, but with a simple whisper. "Thanks for hearing me." And then silence. He didn't post the video immediately. He just sat there for a while, phone in his lap, eyes on the darkening sky. Snowflakes began to fall again, slow and soft. And Jack Monroe, for the first time in a long time, didn't flinch at the quiet. Beatrice Maynard moved slowly through the aisles of the darkened library. It was almost 7 p.m. and everyone was gone, except for the soft hum of the building settling into night. She carried a stack of returned books in her arms, mostly well-worn paperbacks and a few picture books from the children's section. As she passed the back reading room, she paused. Jack's chair was still pushed back from the table, his empty mug beside a pencil. Nothing dramatic, just the gentle imprint of someone who had been present. Someone who had taken up space and finally allowed himself to. Beatrice smiled. She set the stack of books down and walked to the genealogy room, a small corner of the library few people visited anymore. There, she opened a filing drawer labeled Maynard Collection. Inside were letters, journals, newspaper clippings, everything she'd chosen to keep about her late husband. She hadn't opened the file in years. Gently, she pulled out a faded letter with the corner folded down. It wasn't one of his official military correspondences. It was a handwritten note, likely tucked inside a book and forgotten until now. She opened it. "B. If I don't come home, don't let the silence take you. Speak with your eyes. Your hands. Your kindness. That's where your voice always lived anyway. Love you always, J." She let the letter fall closed in her hand and exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It had been decades. But somehow, in watching Jack that day, in seeing him pause before speaking, in the way Lila responded to him, she'd remembered who she was before grief hardened her voice. She tucked the letter back into the file, closed the drawer, and turned out the lights. As she walked out, she passed the children's corner. Lila's usual spot was empty, but something had been left behind. A small paper flower folded from a page torn from The Secret Garden. Beatrice picked it up, pressed it gently between her palms, and smiled. Jack wasn't the only one learning how to speak again.